Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Scratch explanation video. In this video, we're going to be building off of the projectile project from the last video. So if you haven't watched that, you may want to go ahead and do that now, just so you kind of know what's going on. And in this video, we're going to be doing two things. One is we're going to be limiting the range of motion for our enemy sprite so that it doesn't pop up all the way over here on the left side of the screen and kind of touch your player sprite. And the second, as you can see, my enemy sprite is now throwing a second projectile towards my player sprite, and when my player sprite gets hit, I am losing points in my score. So I'm actually at -9 right now, because I've been hit a lot while I've been talking. So I'm going to pause the video for just a second. I'm going to reset the code to be back right where we were at the end of the last video, and then I will show you all the steps to do what I'm doing now. Okay, so in the last video, we ended by just making this enemy sprite move around, and we can press our spacebar or whatever key you used to throw our projectile at the enemy sprite. Well, as you can see, the enemy sprite sometimes bounces and actually touches our player sprite. We don't really want that, at least not for this game. So we're going to be going to the enemy sprite, and we look at its code, and right now it just says forever glide 1 second to a random position. And what we want to do is we want to limit its motion so that it's not truly random. We kind of box it in a little bit so that there's like a little imaginary line right here that it doesn't cross. And to do that, we're going to go to our motion blocks. And right underneath this random position block, there's a block that says glide 1 second to X and then Y. And it'll have numbers. Now your numbers will be different than mine, and that's fine because we're going to change them anyway. So go ahead and put that inside that forever loop that you should have from the previous video. And then to set your limits, go to your operators and do pick random 1 to 10 in both the X and the Y. And you see that the glide block just automatically expands to fit that block. Now for your X, you're going to have to do a little bit of testing on this, because as you can see, if I move my enemy sprite right here, the X and Y values will change. So you want to make sure that your X value doesn't get too far into the negative. So for example, this is -36, but that's right at the center of the sprite. So the glove right here is more like -90 or so. So I might do -40 for my X value, and then on the other end of the X, so on the right side, the X value goes generally to 240 or so. You can technically go a little bit higher. You can see it's 248 or 250 or whatever, but you don't want it necessarily to go all the way off the screen. So I usually just do 240. For the Y value, again, if we just drag our sprite up, it looks like we're at Y 175, but right here, her head is cut off and we can't even really reach the target that we're aiming for, so we probably want to make it a little bit lower than that. So we might do something like 140 to -140. And these numbers are just suggestions. You can obviously play with it, and depending on the size of your sprite, you may need to adjust those numbers a little bit just to sort of get your sprite to where you want it. But when we press our green flag now, we see our sprite still bounces around randomly, but it looks like it's not going to come all the way over here and touch our cat, which is what we want. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and add the projectile sprite that our enemy is going to throw back at us. So we'll go to our sprite menu. We're going to choose a sprite. I'm just going to pick this ball just because it's really easy. And in the code for this new projectile, we can actually borrow a lot of the code from our old projectile. And we just need to modify it a little bit. So I'm going to show you a little trick in Scratch. If you click on the first block of a bit of code, you can drag the whole block around. And if you kind of drag that over and hover it over a sprite that you want it to copy to, you'll notice that that sprite wiggles a little bit. You have to hover the very top block over it, and it just shakes a little bit. If you let go right on that block, it zaps back to where it was here. But if I click on the ball, it now has a copy of that code as well. So what we would need to do is we want our ball not to go to sprite 1, that's our cat. We want it to go to the sprite called catcher. So we change that to catcher. Then we want it to repeat until touching color. Well, we don't really want it to touch this color because that's on our enemy sprite. So we want it to repeat until it touches the cat or it touches the edge. So we'll get rid of this touching color block and go to sensing, and we're going to say touching mouse pointer, but we'll click that drop down and just change it to sprite 1 because that's the name of our cat. Then when it says move 10 steps, well, if it moves 10 steps, it's going to go from left to right the way that our baseball does. So to go from right to left, we need to make it go minus 10 steps. And then at the end, instead of going to sprite 1, because that's the cat, we don't want it to hit the cat and then go to the cat also. That doesn't really make sense. We need to switch that around so it goes to catcher. Now the last thing that we need to do is we don't want our enemy sprite to throw its projectile at the same time that we are throwing ours. We want it to be random. So instead of this when space key pressed, we'll go to events, do a when the green flag is clicked, then we're going to grab a forever because we want it to happen for as long as the program is going. Then we are going to go to our control blocks and grab a wait 1 second block. Then we can drag all this other code underneath that. Now, if I just press this now, what you'll see is it waits 1 second and it fires every 1 second. And maybe that's what you want, and that's totally fine. You can adjust that number however you want it, so you can make it a half second, you can make it 3 seconds, whatever. But if you want it to be a little more random, you can again go to operators and use this pick random block. And let's say I do it every 1 to 3 seconds. So now it might fire really quickly, or it might fire really slowly, like this. And that just introduces a little bit of an element of randomness to the game to make it a little harder to predict where and how you should move. So the final thing that we need to do is we need to update the scoring system. So if you remember from the original projectile video, we set a score so that when it touches the color of the catcher's glove right here, the catcher's mitt I should say, we gain a point. And again, we can copy this code and reuse a lot of it, but we need to modify it slightly. So we're going to drag this code, and we can drag it onto our cat. And again, I'm just going to hover the top block, so the when the green flag clicked in this case, over sprite 1 and see it wiggles. All right. Now I'm in sprite 1's code. I drag this over here. We can leave this set score to 0. That's totally fine. The when the green flag clicked, that's totally fine. We already have a set score to 0 block in our baseball, but it doesn't hurt anything to have 2 of them. So that we can just leave that. You can take it out if you want, if it really bugs you, but you can also leave it in. Now, in this case, we don't want it to be sensing if it's touching the color brown because our cat doesn't have that color on it. So instead, we want to get rid of that. We'll go to sensing, and instead we're going to grab this touching mouse pointer again. We'll change it to touching the ball, because if we want the cat to sense whether it's touching this projectile ball. And then we can do change score by -1 instead of change score by 1, so that whenever the cat gets hit by the ball, you lose a point. Now, you could build this code very similarly in the ball, but I prefer to do it on the cat just simply because there's already a fair bit of code here, and it just visually is a little bit easier to understand what's going on. So now, I'm just going to let the cat hold still, and if it gets hit, as you can see, we lose a point. And if I manage to get it in the glove, then I should regain a point. But it might take me a second because I'm not actually very good at this game that I've just made. Oh no. There we go. All right, you see it jumped from -6 to -5, and then I immediately got hit again, so now I'm back at -6. So you may want to increase the size of the target that you're aiming for, and you could do that, for example, by, instead of doing touching color, you could say touching just the catcher in general. But that's up to you. It kind of depends on how difficult you want to make your game. But that about wraps it up for this particular video. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.